Hi, my name is Carrie, and I am going to do a little talk about writing. I want to thank my friend Raylene. She asked me to create this presentation for her church women's group. So it inspired me to think about writing and putting together a talk about it. I also want to thank BlueFlix Films for agreeing to film it and to let other people see it that haven't seen it live. So I just want to say thank you. So I guess we'll jump right in. So I thought I'd share a little bit about me. I have been telling stories since before I can remember, and I know that sounds really weird, but hear me out. When I was little, I had imaginary friends. Not unusual, except mine were a little unusual. My parents would ask me who I'm talking to, and I would say my friends, and they would ask me what language I was speaking, because I was obviously not speaking English, and it didn't sound like any traditional language, and so they'd ask me what language I spoke, and I would tell them I was speaking Martian, because I thought I was from Mars. Fun thing, yeah. So when I was little, I knew that at 8 I had to go home to Mars, which kind of freaked me out. I was worried about my 8th birthday. My mom told me a couple of years ago that she was worried about my 8th birthday as well. She thought that I had some sort of inside information, some sort of thing that knew that I was going to have some catastrophic end at the age of 8. Obviously, that didn't happen, although I think my Martian side may have left because I can't speak Martian anymore. Another thing that I did when I was growing up was I would love to put together plays and tell stories and do puppet shows and even make movies. Now we're talking the late 70s, early 80s, so we're not talking simple, shoot with your phone kind of movies. These were the big box with the long, thick cord to the wall and the long, thick cord to the giant camera. Yeah, so my next door neighbor invited me over to watch The Wizard of Oz, and I'd never seen it before, and I watched that, and then he and his family took me to my very first musical, which was Annie, and I fell in love with storytelling at that point. So I have always wanted to be a storyteller. My first piece of published work was a short story that I submitted for an anthology. There was a Facebook contest, and the publishing company said, "We're looking for short stories. Here's the parameters, here's the requirements. Send us your story." So I sent that in. I found out about it on the 2nd of January. I had to finish the short and send it in by the end of the month, so 30 days, and I did a short story. This came out in August of 2014. My short story was one of the 10 chosen for this book, and it's the very last story in the book. And then in November of 2017, I released the same short story, but I released it on its own. So it's available on ebook across the board. The next piece that I had was in the Mighty Pen. We were given, again, some parameters, what we had to tell in our story. We had to submit it and fall into certain things. It's pretty normal for anthologies. And so once again, I submitted a story, and it was published, and that came out in November of 2018. I don't strictly write short stories. I do have a few novels that I'm working on. I tend to write in romance. It's just kind of where my brain goes. Not everything I write is romance, though. I am participating in an anthology in 2019 where I'm writing a short story every month, so that's been interesting because it's stretching my imagination and giving me lots of different directions to go, so that's been really fun. I am also writing in several subgenres within romance, so I have a paranormal romance that I have a contemporary sports romance that I'm working on, and that's going to be a collection. I have a couple of historical romances I'm working on, but I am also working on the novelization of a character that I play in a web series. I've also written a television show and some short films, so my writing isn't strictly novel writing or story writing. It's, kind of more broad. So what is storytelling? That's a pretty loaded question. There's so many answers to this, but here are some of the most common things that are storytelling. They're sharing of your ideas, your faith, your history, where you are. They are used for creativity. Stories, concepts, ideas, things that you would like. They can also be escape. You can do fantasy, science fiction, altered reality, which I really love the altered reality. That's kind of fun to play with. And then the other thing that stories do is they help in dealing with reality. So you can give people resources by sharing your story. There's lots of things that story is. Let's take a look at story structure. It's, an important thing to know what a story is. So our story structure, you have to have a subject, a who or a what. So something or someone is doing something. And then you have to have some sort of situation come up, a conflict, something happening to this person. And then of course you have to resolve it. You have to figure out how to get from where you started to where you want to be. So let's take a look at a very, very, very basic story. Taking those 3 simple pieces, let's look at Jane, who's making a cake. Now we need a situation or a conflict to come up with it. Oh dear, she doesn't have any eggs. She's looked in the fridge, she's looked in the cupboard, she doesn't have any eggs. There's lots of things she could do. This particular story has her driving to the store to get eggs. Now, I have friends who have chickens in their backyard, and they would go to the backyard and pull some eggs from there, or pull them off of the counter because they have 70,000 of them sitting on the counter because the chickens lay so many. Or maybe she's a magician and she conjures the eggs out of the thin air. Who knows? But this is a simple version so you can get kind of the idea of what it is. So now that we kind of know what a story is and how we should structure it, let's look at how we share our stories. The very first and basic way that we've shared stories from the beginning of time is through oral storytelling. It's, no matter where you believe time began, we as humans have been sharing our stories. We've shared our history, and I'm going to come back to this real or imagined piece at the end, but we've also shared our faith and our heritage and who we are and where we come from. We've used it for entertainment, we've used it to educate, and we've used it for advancement. So let's go back to that history. I'm sure that you've heard the phrase, history is written by the winner, or history is written by the victor. I like to say that it's more written, it's slanted by whoever is telling the story. So if you have a war, the victors will tell you that these usurpers came in and tried to take over, and you kept them from doing that. If you lost the war, you were just trying to give yourself freedom or get yourself whatever it is, and you were defeated by the big bad. So no matter which side of the war or the history or the situation you're on, that will tell how you tell the story. And that's going to come back around towards the end as well. The next step that stories were told was in the written word. Now, yes, there were cave drawings, and there's the hieroglyphs, and there's all sorts of things. I'm thinking more the languages that we've developed, that we've written down, that we've done. One of the things that the written language did is it created a class system. So those who could read were elevated. Those who couldn't read were relegated to the lower end. They were often thought of as uneducated or unintelligent, and I just want to assure you that if you cannot read or you cannot read well, that does not mean that you are unintelligent. It's simply a skill you have not learned. I know people who do not read well who are extremely intelligent, and people who are very well read who are not very smart. So the written word simply did that separation of class. The next thing that happened helped to reduce that gap some, and that was the visual and audible. It's kind of going back to the oral storytelling, but it's being able to share the same stories as those who read. Those who can't read can share the same stories. So either you can see the movie, listen to the audio version of it. There's lots of different ways that you can hear the story and understand the story. So that happened a while ago, and yes, while the written word was around and we had plays and those kinds of things, they were much more relegated for the more wealthy. So with the inception of the radio and television and movies, it has brought storytelling in the visual manner and in the audible manner to the masses. So you don't have to be very rich in order to go see the story be told. So since storytelling has been around for a long time, pretty much forever, there's probably not a new story out there. That doesn't mean that your story isn't important, and I'll explain what I mean by this. What makes the story important is the storyteller. My favorite piece of artwork is called The Starry Night, and Vincent van Gogh painted it. Vincent van Gogh painted this in June of 1887. He painted it while he was in an insane asylum. He had a window that was very tiny, very high up in the wall, and had bars on it. So his view was pretty small, but he looked around the bars and through the wall and painted this pretty amazing piece. One of the things that I learned just a few years ago about this that I thought was absolutely fascinating was scientists took a look at the whirls and swirls and all of the things that are in there, and they realized that he was painting the air currents and the trajectories of the stars. So Vincent van Gogh wasn't just painting art, he was painting science. Which, I mean, if you look at Vincent and his life, it's a pretty amazing thing. There is a television show called Doctor Who. I know a lot of people have seen it. I love it. I love the reboot that kind of brought it back to the forefront. My favorite episode is in series 5 or season 5, and it's episode 10, and it's called Vincent and the Doctor. And before I get into that, I should probably tell you that the Doctor is an alien. He is not from Earth. He travels in a spaceship. It's called a TARDIS, and that stands for time and relative dimensions in space. So he travels forward in time, backwards in time, and to other planets. In this episode, he and his companions go back in time to the late 1880s and meet Vincent van Gogh. One of the companions kind of inspires him to paint several pieces that we know exist. I don't believe that the Doctor and his companions actually went back in time and inspired Vincent van Gogh, but I love that they took their fantasy and blended it with the reality and married them together to create this new version. So, in this episode, towards the end, it's going to be a spoiler if you haven't watched it and you don't want to know, fast forward really quick. The Doctor brings Vincent to what was then modern times, so the late 2010s. Brings him to a museum where they have a display of his work. And Vincent overhears the curator saying that Vincent van Gogh, was one of the most important painters of his time. And that just breaks my heart, because when Vincent was alive, he sold one piece of artwork. And it wasn't like somebody went, "Oh, I love it, I want to buy it." No, a family member went, "Oh, you need money and you won't take it, so here, I'll buy your painting." I mean, he didn't want to take charity, he didn't want to, be taken care of. He simply wanted to create his art, and he wanted people to love it. And the only money he ever got was from a family member who felt sorry for him. So that's the heartbreaking side of Vincent's story, but the amazing side is the pieces that he did. So if you take the Doctor Who and you marry it with the Starry Night, you can get what is called the exploding TARDIS. Now I have a copy of this print, but I don't have it framed, so I have it simply here on the image. So you can take this TARDIS, which is the spaceship that the Doctor travels in, and they married it with the idea and the concept of Starry Night, and they've changed it. So it's the same, and yet it's different. Now, I have a friend who is an author who also loves this piece. He took the very dramatic step of inking this under his skin on his arm. And we have a video of that, so we'll show that video here. So, as you can see, it's the same, and yet it's different. There's lots of pieces in his tattoo that are not in the original piece, but there are a lot of parts that are in it. The other thing I wanted to say is my daughter knows that I love this piece. And so she decided to paint for me her version of A Starry Night. And so she did this. She finger painted it, and no, she wasn't a toddler. She was an adult. She was 7 or 8 when she painted this, but she finger painted it. As you can see, there are a lot of elements that are the same, but there are a lot of things that are different. She didn't like doing the trees. Those are too hard. She didn't want to do all the buildings. That was too complicated, especially since she was finger painting. But the end result is very similar to the original. So this is a story of something that is different even when it's the same. So let's look at something that's a little more common, a little more well-known. The Starry Night, a lot of people know it, but some people don't. So I'm gonna tell a story about something else that's actually probably even more common, and that is the story of Cinderella. Most people have heard the story of Cinderella. Most people don't necessarily think of the Brothers Grimm version, which is fairly likely one of the earliest that were put into print. Now, if you want a very, very dark, very, very, very dark, very icky story, this is your thing. Spoiler, the stepsisters don't just try and squish their feet into the shoe, they cut them off so that they will fit. And that's just not even the grossest. I mean, yeah. So, not a children's story. No, most of us think of the more sanitized Disney version. You know, the pretty little blonde who runs down the stairs and loses her shoe. Oh no. And then jumps into the carriage and then goes off and poof, turns back into a pumpkin, and she's got mice to help her make her clothes and all of those things, and that is very much not what likely was one of the first stories. Same story, different version, very different version. But let's take this a step further. Somebody read Cinderella and said, you know what this needs? Zombies. Cinderella, Zombie Queen. Yes, this is an actual book that is available on Amazon that I've not read it. I don't know anything about it other than it is Cinderella, Zombie Queen. I mean, you know, they took a look at Cinderella and said, let's throw in zombies. Why not? So let's go a little bit more tame. This is my friend's book. Her name is Casey. She wrote this book called Riches to Rags, and the tagline for it is, most girls dream of being a princess, but one princess just wants to be a normal girl. So she's taken the story of Cinderella and she's flipped it on its head. She's taken the base and restructured it. It's pretty big thing right now of retelling of fairy tales. So here's another one. Seriously, Cinderella is so annoying. This is from the wicked stepmother's point of view. Same story, different version. Like I said, it depends on who's telling the story. Here we go. Stories from around the world. Cinderella is a story that's been told around the world, and there are bases in a lot of different cultures that are the Cinderella story. So it truly is from around the world. Here's another Cinderella. And you know what? Somebody said, let's make Cinderella a guy. Why not? It's my story. That's the way I want to tell it. Perfect. Here's another one. It's about the dress. That's obviously a more modern one with the tennis shoes and such. American Cinderella, a Chinese Cinderella, Cinderella's shoes, Cinderella, Cinderella, Cinderella. I did a search on Amazon in the books section and came up with 232 pages of options. And it's not 232 books, that's 232 pages, 20, 25, 30. That's hundreds, if not thousands, of books just by typing in the name Cinderella. So, like I said, just because it's a story that's been told before doesn't mean that it's not important, doesn't mean that it isn't interesting, doesn't mean that it doesn't have an audience. So, let's find our muse. I used to think muses had to be women, and they had to be the very, formal and, exotic and like the Greek muses, And then Disney came out with these guys. They're from Hercules, and they kind of have sass, and they kind of have all sorts of fun, and I still had a trouble with it though, because I definitely don't have a female muse, which I always thought was weird. Thought maybe I was weird or something. And then I read On Writing by Stephen King. Stephen King's muse is male. Stephen King's muse is this crotchety old man who sits in the basement and smokes cigars and yells at him. That's not my kind of a muse. I don't think I would get a very good response to that type of a muse. But everybody has their own muse. Everyone has their own inspiration. Everybody has that spark, that something that says, here's a story, you need to tell it. It's there, you have to find it. So, now that we know where to look, it's inside us, let's do a little bit of some practical applications. I found a picture that is fantastic, and I used it to do a writing prompt. So I'm going to show you the picture in a minute, and what I want you to do is I want you to look at the picture. What does the picture say to you? Who lives here? Why are they here? When are they here? Where are they? What's going on? These are all things that you need to think about when you're writing a story. So I'm going to give you the picture here in a minute, and I want you to just take some time and just write. Just let the picture speak to you and put words on the page. You don't have to write like, a tome. You don't have to write a long thing, 2-3 sentences, maybe a paragraph. Whatever it says to you, whatever it draws from you, that's what you should write. Once we get done, we'll come back and I'll share 2 different stories that I came up with that are very different because I wanted to show difference from the same place. I just looked at this picture and these were the stories that came up. And then I'll share a couple of things that people have shared during live events that I thought were pretty interesting. So, before I show you the picture, I want you to remember, whatever story you do, it's the right story for you. There is no wrong story. So, here we go. There's our picture. Enjoy. Welcome back. Hopefully that was fun for you. One of my favorite things to do is to free write. I often find if I'm at a point where I am stuck and I get that writer's block, or as authors like to call it, our imaginary friends not talking to us, sometimes a free write on something completely different than what I'm working on will make an amazing breakthrough and let me just get back into the flow. So hopefully this was inspiring for you and hopefully you enjoyed the process. So as I promised, I will share 2 stories that I came up with when I looked at this picture. So here's the first one. The lake house was always her favorite. She spent evenings on the dock sipping wine and reading. Winters were inside by the fire, cocoa in her mug, and again a good book. Back when Jack was alive, the kids were little, they spent time swimming in the lake, enjoying summer sunshine. Now though, she was alone. Jack was gone, the kids were grown, and the grandkids were in that surly teenage angst phase. She still loved to come up to the cabin, sit alone, and just be. So, nice little story. Tells who's there, what's going on, why they're there, all the things that we need to know in a story. All right, so here's the second one. Over there, they don't even know I exist. Oh, sure, they say they believe in me. Really, though, I'm folklore. My kind's been here longer, though, and will still be around after their frail species fades from memory. Sometimes we like to give them a fright, things that go bump in the night and all. Tonight, though, maybe I'll just take one of them home with me. The pretty one with the long dark hair? Yeah, that's what I'll do. So, as you can see, very different story. First one was third person, this one's in first person. First one was just contemporary story. This one's got a little more of a horror, a thriller kind of feel to it. So, different story, same picture. I had someone write from the point of view of the house, listening to the pitter-patter of little feet on their floor and the laughter bouncing off of the walls. I thought that was pretty creative. Somebody had it as a last-ditch effort, last stand, so to speak, in an apocalyptic future. Somebody had it as a writing cabin. The novelist went to unplug and go completely away from, the world. Someone, they all came from the same picture. So, as you can see, same start, different story. So, the question is, what's your story? I believe that everyone has at least one story in them. I have people tell me, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you come up with these things and where they come from. And I'm like, it's inside me. I can't help it. I think everybody has a story in them. The challenge is finding the best way to share that story. For me, it's romance. I love love. I love love. And I love to talk about love and I love to share about love. For you, it's something else maybe, something different. The trick is, it doesn't have to be fiction. And a lot of people get confused by thinking storytelling has to be once upon a time. It doesn't. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Your story could be something about something that you're passionate about. Maybe child rearing is what you love. You've gone to school for it, you've learned about it, you do that as your vocation, or it's something you just feel that you excel at. Tell your story. Maybe it's in arts, crafts, cooking, something like that. Whatever it is, you have a story. Tell your story. Maybe it's public speaking. I look like I can talk and speak and stuff, but I don't. Give me a script. Put me in a stage, I can talk to hundreds of people. Doesn't matter. Sit me down in front of a couple of people and ask me to share myself. Yeah, no, I'd rather not. Maybe you're good at it. Maybe you can share it. Share your story. Financial planning. Maybe you are a number cruncher. You are a phenomenal budget maker. You just do it. Share your story. Photography. People love pictures. People love to see. They always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Maybe photography is your story. Share it. The list can go on and on and on. These are just a handful of things that I wanted to throw out to get your mind to think outside of the traditional once upon a time story box. Maybe you love an old story, something that you've read, been read to, whatever it is. Retellings are very popular right now, as is pretty obvious by the Cinderella expression that we're, the Cinderella thing we did. Take an old story and give it a twist. Do something new with it. Move it forward in time, move it backwards in time, go sideways, put it on another planet, change something about it. Just tell the story. Take it to a new planet, turn it on its head, any of these things. Just remember, the only rules, there aren't really any rules to storytelling except for the basics. Who or what's there, what's happened, and how do we get past it? Every story needs to be shared, even if it's just with family and friends. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to share your story. It doesn't matter whether you expect to share your story with the entire world, or if you want to just keep it to yourself, or maybe some close friends and family. Somebody's going to benefit from your story. Your story's going to impact somebody. It's going to change somebody. Share your story. The object of fiction isn't grammatical correctness, but to make the reader welcome and then tell a story. To make him or her forget, whenever possible, that he or she is reading a story at all. Books are uniquely portable magic. That's from Stephen King's On Writing. I want you to listen to this, to read this, to take it in. One of the most prolific authors in the world is telling you that the grammar isn't the most important part of your story. Is grammar important? Absolutely. Should you have somebody check your work? Absolutely. But if you can make me forget that where I am reading isn't where I am living, then you have done your job right. I just wanted that to sink in. That's probably one of the most profound things that I got from this book, was simply that the story is the most important part. So now that you've realized that you have a story inside of you, the next step is to figure out how you can share it. Obviously, if you want, you can simply go the old-fashioned route and share a story around the campfire, whatever it is. But if your goal is to share it with a broader audience, then you've got a little bit of work to do. So step one is, what is your medium? Are you into the visual arts? Painting, photography, sculpture, metalworking, those things that are tangible that you touch. Hold a showcase. There are studios all over the world where amateur or beginner artists can bring their things to show. Maybe your story is a melody. It's a tune. It's music. Find a studio. I'm sitting right now on a campus that has an audio recording studio. They're all over the world. Find one. If you can't find one, look up how to make your own. Make music if that's the way your story needs to be shared. Find a studio or make a studio. Share your story. Books, poems, or the written word, that's probably the easiest, simplest way to share, simply because of the digital marketplace that's out there. Amazon, iBooks, Kobo, Nook, which is the Barnes & Noble Google Play, Smashwords, all electronic. The only limit is you. You are the limit to how you can share your story. I'd like to give you a few words of caution, and a lot of what I am going to talk about has to do with the written word and with books in particular, books or poems or those kinds of things. But some of it is very important across the board. Avoid a vanity press. Now, you can say avoid a vanity press and somebody might not know what you're talking about. What I'm saying is, hi, give me money and I'll print your book. You don't need to do that. Do books cost money to print? Sure, there are investments that you need to make into your work, which we will get to. But I give you $5,000 and you give me 5 books? No. That's not the way it works. There are small presses around. You can do it independently. There are a lot of different ways that you can share your books. You do not and should not go with a vanity press. Run like they're on fire and they want to hug you. Just run away. If you are going to do something, read the contract. Read all the disclaimers, read the whole thing, and yes, I know it's long, and yes, I know it's full of legalese, and yes, I know we always just scroll to the bottom and click accept. Read it. Read it, read it, read it, read it, read it. It's so important that you read it. Just read it. If you don't understand something, ask somebody you trust. Ask somebody who's smarter than you. And if you don't think somebody is smarter than you, well, then there are a lot of people. But ask somebody else. Say, what do you see in this that should not be? Read the fine print. Read it all. Hire an editor. Now, that can take many forms. Small presses will have editors on staff, and they will often edit your work as part of the contract. You can pay somebody to edit your work, get references, ask a lot of questions, talk to the references. Don't just ask for them and then assume since they've given me references, they must be good. Ask for references, talk to the references. If you can't afford to pay somebody and you don't want to go with a small press and want to do it by yourself, find somebody you trust to read your work. I'm not talking your mom who's going to look at it and say, oh, it's so wonderful, I love it. You need a mom like mine. I read my stories to my mom and she's like, wait. What was that? Say that again? That doesn't make sense. That's the kind of editor you want. That's the kind of person you want to read your book. Friends, family, find a good writing group to connect with. Find people who love the words and are good at the words. Ask them to read it and take criticism. Now, if somebody tells you it's just dumb, you can ignore them. If somebody says, I don't understand why, what do you mean by? Those are the questions that you need to be able to answer. Because in our head, we see the whole thing, but we don't always write it all down. So if somebody asks you, why is the chicken purple? You better have a reason for why the chicken is purple. I don't know what it is. Maybe it was a blue chicken and it fell into a bucket of red paint. I don't know. But there has to be a reason. So, hire an editor or find someone who is good at the words. Copyright your work. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act says if you publish work online, it technically is copywritten. Copyright it anyways. Because somebody out there is going to steal your hard work and give it away to people for free. How do I know this? There's actually a court case that's been working and going on for the first part of this year where an author had his books pirated and they were being given away on a website. He sued the website owner. He had copywritten his work and the judge found in his favor. Didn't get the money he wanted, but did cause some action and has caused things to move forward in this case. So, copyright your work. Do it because if he hadn't, there would be questions. So, copyright your work. That's important. This next one is use legitimate photographs. And I'm talking about if you use photos in your book or if you use photos on your cover. Just a search of images and you find one and you want it does not mean you can use it. I have an image I want to use on my paranormal romance and I am dying to use it and I want it so bad because it's so perfect. The photographer has given me permission to use it. The subject in the photograph has not. I cannot use the image. Part of it is because I can't connect with the person in the photograph. I've tried and the ways that I haven't worked, so I'm working to try and get permission to use this image for the cover of my book. If I get it, I will be beyond ecstatic. But I digress. Use legitimate photographs. Purchase the photograph. Find a photographer. Make sure that they have a release from the subject. That's important. I do photo shoots. I am a model. I sign a release for all of the photographers that I work with that says, yes, you can use my photos. Yes, you have to pay me for them. That's the way it works. I buy a photo, and if this person is on the photo, the photographer takes the money and the model gets money, as it should be. They worked. They should be paid for their work. Purchase a photo. If you don't want to do an exclusive photo, then there are websites out there that you can purchase stock photos from. Just do a search, you'll find them. Make sure that we go back up to number 2, read the disclaimers. Read what you are and are not allowed to use the photo for. So this goes for books, this would go for covers of, if you're doing any visual or audiobooks or any of those, or music or any of those things. Know what you can and cannot use the image for. The nice thing about going straight to a photographer is you have exclusive rights. The not so nice thing is they can be expensive, but you get what you pay for. You can also find places where you can use photos for free. Read the disclaimers. One of those places is unsplash.com. It's a website that I was turned on to a few months ago, and the pictures that you've seen in here that are not book covers are from that. People ask that you, thank them for using the picture, which if you look through the thing, there's the little tags on the bottom that have those. It's a great place. There are other places where you can get unsplashed unsplashed photos, and what a splash is that's the copyright that goes over the picture. It's on the image. The other option, take your own. I have a friend who's an author who all of her books have flowers on the covers, and she takes her own photos of her own flowers in her own garden. It's great. So those are my words of caution. Do research, ask questions, find the answer. So the only question we have now is who's next? Romance your thing? Maybe you're the next Danielle Steele, the #1 grossing author, like everywhere. She has 1 million books, so that's probably why. Maybe romance isn't your thing, and you like horror a little better. Stephen King, top 10 grossing author. Fun thing about Stephen King, he threw his very first book away, and his wife said no. So, don't throw your stuff away either. Just saying. Maybe you like Michener, or you're a Mary Higgins Clark fan. Ludlum, Clancy, the list goes on and on. Maybe you're the next Tennyson and a great playwright. You're the next George R.R. Martin and J.R.R. Tolkien. Those long, epic things. Or maybe it's music. You're the next Dylan or Lennon, McCartney, Simon, Mitchell. You've got a great orchestral piece like Beethoven or Bach or Chopin. Honestly, it's not just books. It's not just movies. It's books and movies and music and photographs and structures and sculptures and paintings and all of the things. Tell your story. Tell your story. So, if you have any questions, you can email me. I can't guarantee I'll get back to you right away, but I do check my email regularly, and so Feel free to send me an email if you have questions or anything like that. But that's my little talk on telling your story. Have a good day.